Hey folks, welcome to our Halloween special for office hours. My name is Sohan Maheshwar. I'm a dev advocate at AuthZed, and today we are going to be talking about deploying SpiceDB to ECS. We'll give you more context in a bit, but before that, I want to introduce Tanner. Hey Tanner, welcome to office hours.
How's it going?
Yeah, well, as you can see, I'm in full costume mode for Halloween. Yeah, I'm a rainbow unicorn, I guess. Yeah, whatever. Yeah, so Office Hours is a simple format. We'll try and demo something, talk about something related to SpiceDB and AuthZed. If you have any questions, please put them on the chat on the right-hand side. We'd love to hear from you, and let us know where you're viewing this from. I'm based in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands, and Tanner, you're in the US, correct?
Yeah, I'm in Fort Collins, Colorado, so just a little bit north of Denver.
Nice. All right. So, Tanner, since you're going to be doing most of the talking today, what do you have for us?
Sure. So the general topic is deploying SpiceDB on ECS, and some of like the things that make it nice, the things that make it not so nice. I figured I would tell a story of the journey that my previous company took with um, SpiceDB deployments, starting on ECS, eventually ending up on EKS, and kind of what we learned along the way and how we made the decisions that we made. So
Yeah, let's start from there, right? And I think before that, we do have a question, which is Janessa asks, "Hey, why doesn't Tanner have a costume?" Tanner's cosplaying an engineer working on SpiceDB, but he also is an engineer working on SpiceDB.
it's a great costume.
Yeah, it's a great costume. Yeah, but yeah, we'll fix that for next year's Halloween stream, Tanner.
Yeah.
All right. So also for context, Tanner was super involved in the SpiceDB community and also getting SpiceDB in his previous company. So yeah, Tanner, maybe we can start there. And yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So my previous company was a company that did clinical trials, like software that helps run clinical trials, getting people enrolled in clinical trials. And when I joined, they were in the process of like growing really rapidly and trying to split things off into microservices. And so SpiceDB fit our use case pretty well because we'd already kind of hit the limits of what we could do with a roll your own authorization solution. We were having issues with state synchronization between two services that needed to use some of the same authorization state. And so we landed on SpiceDB as our centralized authorization service. We liked the sort of Zanzibar approach to things. And our as far as deployment goes, the whole company was using ECS at the time. All of our SRE, all of the tooling that our SREs had built, and all of the Terraform stuff that we had sort of presupposed that we were going to use ECS. And so we were like, okay, we're going to use ECS. SpiceDB comes packaged in Docker containers. It's really easy to set up and run in any sort of container-first environments, which ECS is. And so we got it stood up, we got it deployed, had a couple of instances, and it worked pretty well out of the box. The thing that we ran into was that every now and then we would see 502s, like a broken connection between our, we had a service that fronted SpiceDB, and then it was what was speaking gRPC to SpiceDB. And that was running through an application load balancer. And which is, I think, the default for ECS. I know you can configure like classic versus ALB versus
network also, maybe?
Yeah.
Network? Yeah.
I don't remember off the top of my head.
Yeah.
But the thing that we ran into was that we were seeing 502s, like the connections dropped, and then we would just have errors from permission checks. And in a mission critical service like SpiceDB, where you want everything to be 100% uptime, that wasn't great. And so we started digging into why it might happen. I remember one of the first things we found was that there's actually a flag on an ALB that you can set that says, hey, this is gRPC traffic, please treat it accordingly. There isn't a whole lot of documentation on what that actually means. And in practice, we found that we were still having the same issues. If I had to sort of speculate about it, it would be that like gRPC clients make an assumption that they have, one, that they're aware of all of the nodes that they're talking to, and two, that they have a long-lived connection to every node that they're connected to. And then they kind of multiplex and round robin across those nodes that they're aware of. But it's that like they want to have a long-lived direct connection to the node that they're talking to. And so putting an application load balancer in between them, I'm not entirely sure what the sort of like underlying technology or like what the internals are, if it's proxying the connection all the way through to a node, or if it's terminating at the ALB and then redispatching out to the other nodes. But something about it seemed to be contravening an expectation of how gRPC works. And we could never figure out how to get it to play nicely. We would always have those 502s. So the next place we went after that was you can use DNS for service discovery with gRPC. So if you like connect to a target and that target is DNS, and like when the client makes a request for like the targets associated with that DNS server, they'll get the whole list of nodes back, and they'll hold that as the list of nodes that it's going to talk to. And we did that using AWS Cloud Map, which is kind of like DNS as a service. It provides both a DNS interface and an HTTP API interface. And so we used it just in DNS mode, and then had it connected to all of the ECS instances that were like a part of that cluster. And that worked pretty well for us for a time. We didn't have the same issue of dropped connections, so like we weren't getting intermittent failures. One thing that we did run into is that, like, because of the caching around DNS and sort of the lag time around DNS propagation, when a node was added to or dropped from the cluster, so like if we deployed a new SpiceDB version, say, and updated the ECS configuration, when it rolled the pods, it would take a while for the new pods to be like picked up and recognized through DNS by the gRPC clients. Luckily, our traffic wasn't ever such that was a huge problem.
Okay.
But it was, you know, it was errors that we were running into. And so then that kind of became like, okay, what do we do next about this? We spent a bunch of time in the SpiceDB Discord, actually. That was a part of my sort of first interactions with SpiceDB. And like had a long conversation with another engineer, Victor, who has done some work around it. And one of the things that he...
Sorry, Tana, can I just, say that please join our Discord if you haven't already. Have to put the plug to join our Discord, since you mentioned it.
Absolutely.
So hence I'm jumping in. Yeah, come join our Discord. We hang out there all the time. Also, just as a quick recap, we are talking about deploying SpiceDB on Amazon ECS. Tana actually went through this entire process in his previous org, so he's taking us through that. And just to give you a recap, he spoke a little bit about how the gRPC calls weren't behaving nicely. So, there were some changes with the load balancer in front of ECS that they were looking at. So go ahead, Tana, while I fix my camera.
For sure. So spent some time talking to Victor about other options potentially. And one of the things that Victor was looking at was whether you could enable Cloud Map as an XDS discovery mechanism, or like XDS adjacent.
Sorry, for context, Anna, what's an XDS mechanism?
I don't actually know what what the acronym stands for. I know it's a protocol for service discovery, and I don't know a lot beyond that.
Okay.
But the idea was
first time I'm hearing of it, hence.
Yeah. And the idea was that it could both help the gRPC clients keep track of what was available and also potentially enable horizontal dispatch, because that was another thing that we ran into with deploying on ECS, is that SpiceDB wants to be aware of all of the other nodes that are in its cluster with it, because part of how it keeps cache hit rates high is by taking, like, when you make a check request, it's going to take the problem and it's going to break the problem down into like all of the independent subunits that it can. And then it's going to take those and it's going to dispatch them. If you only have a single node in the cluster, that dispatch just kind of loops back and like the code continues as if nothing was different. If you have other nodes in the cluster, then it's going to dispatch them out to those other nodes in the cluster. Uses a consistent hash ring mechanism. So the idea is that the same question should go to the same node every time, which makes it a lot more likely that the answer to that question has been cached by that node. It's a big part of the horizontal scaling model of SpiceDB.
Yeah.
But the issue that we ran into is that in ECS, at least out of the box, you don't have any sort of like horizontal discovery mechanism. And so that was a part of what I was talking to Victor about, like as a user, was, hey, how do we get this working in the ECS context? And we looked into using the HTTP APIs for CloudMap to potentially enable something like that. But as we looked deeper into what CloudMap's offering was, we realized that it really wasn't that much better than just using DNS. The analogous Kubernetes mechanism is a service that is really quick to issue changes when a node is added to the pool or a node is removed from the pool. And you want to have that most up-to-date list possible for the gRPC clients, so that you don't have service interruptions. And so we decided that the lag, that like 5-second lag or whatever it was probably too much for it to make sense as like a proper service discovery mechanism. And then the part of the story that's maybe unsatisfying is that at my old company, we never really figured out the best way to do it on ECS, because there had been an initiative to move things into Kubernetes and onto EKS that started close to when I started the company, but then finally culminated probably about 1.5 years into my tenure there. And that was, once we were in Kubernetes, then a lot of these questions fell away because SpiceDB and gRPC just play nicely with Kubernetes.
Yeah. We'll get into that. Jess came in clutch with what XDS is. Thanks, Jess. It's Extensible Discovery Service, a communication protocol used for managing service discovery and dynamic config in a microservice architecture. Okay, I get it now.
Cool.
Yeah. So it is basically for service discovery. Had no idea it was called Extensible Discovery Service. Yeah, thanks, Jess. I just see a few folks have joined our stream. First of all, thanks for joining in, and also happy Halloween, hence the unicorn onesie. We're talking about how Tanner essentially and his company tried deploying SpiceDB on ECS. There were a few issues, especially with the horizontal dispatch, because that's how SpiceDB works, and it queries nodes for horizontally. And you spoke about how then your company just moved over to Kubernetes, and Kubernetes and gRPC actually work fairly well together, right?
Yep. And then I think so. I just wanted to talk about like where we might have gone after that. One thing that may have been an approach was using a network load balancer. So at AuthZed, we use network load balancers with gRPC and other places in our infrastructure. And the idea with a network load balancer is that rather than being like, I think it's like L7 versus L4, if I remember correctly, like it's at the HTTP level versus like down at the TCP level, there's something perhaps even lower. But the idea being that it's doing much less to get in the way of what gRPC is trying to do. So that may have been something that could have helped us out. And another one, which I don't know existed at the time that we were doing this work and this discovery at my old company, but AWS App Mesh is basically Envoy as a service,
Yeah.
like Envoy.io, which is a service mesh sidecar that plays well with gRPC, and assuming that it must come with service discovery mechanisms because that's a part of how Envoy does the work that it does. So I think that would likely be a way that you could kind of glue everything together, but that's not something that I've had the time to go dig into recently. So
Okay. Yeah, fair enough. For folks joining into the stream now, I see a few more people have just joined. Yeah, let us know where you're viewing this stream from. Would love to know, where folks are actually viewing this stream. I actually was recently playing around with installing SpiceDB on EKS, right? And there was a discussion on our internal Slack about the same thing as well, Tanner, which is about installing Envoy for, for actually doing this. And I had a few questions about that as well, which I thought, you know what, I have Tanner's time during the stream, so might as well pick his brains during the stream and ask him questions around that.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I think the big one, right, is if you use is about using like a classic load balancer versus a network load balancer in front of your EKS cluster, and do you have to use Envoy if you're using a network load balancer, basically, right? Because the straight up version, if you install it like using a classic load balancer, works fine. But if you were to switch that around to a network load balancer, do you have to use a service such as Envoy to, talk to your the SpiceDB?
So I know that you don't need to use Envoy specifically because in our own system, like SpiceDB serverless is basically we've got a public facing ingress that's behind a classic load balancer, and that's going into a big old EKS cluster. As far as whether you need some sort of ingress mechanism, I believe you do. And I think we're using just like the standard like Kubernetes ingress controller, whatever that is. But yeah, Envoy and its ingress is an option there. And to my knowledge, is compatible with a network load balancer.
Okay. Yeah, I just dropped the link for the EKS guide, deploying SpiceDB on EKS and not ECS, where, if I'm not mistaken, yes, I think we do just use, Kubernetes ingress there and not anything else. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Actually, Jimmy is jumping in saying Envoy is nice because it supports load balancing gRPC requests. Okay.
Yeah, and that's kind of an interesting thing about gRPC generally. Like, one thing that surprised me as I was like on this journey and learning how gRPC works is that so most HTTP clients are deferring to like the network and to the system to make decisions about load balancing. It's sort of like pushed away from the client, and the client is like relatively thin. It's relatively dumb. The gRPC client is very much the opposite of that. It's a thick client, and it wants to like know a whole lot about the system that it's in and control a whole lot of aspects of like how it talks to its clients. So it has multiple load balancing protocols built into the client. By default, it's going to figure out all of the nodes that it can talk to, and then it's going to run raw nodes requests across them. There are mechanisms for feeding back, like either defining like a custom load balancing protocol that exists in the client, or providing some sort of feedback mechanism into the gRPC client that would help it make load balancing decisions. Where again, this is like all up in there. So it's cool that Envoy can actually like do the work sitting further downstream, because most load balancers aren't capable of that. But then it's an interesting thing of having load balancing at multiple levels as well.
Yeah, I think Jimmy is also chiming in saying most other load balancers actually balance the connections rather than the individual requests. So that's why Envoy is nice. Yeah. Okay. Sweet. Yeah. So go ahead, Tanner. I think I cut you off in the middle of what you were discussing earlier. So
Which was that? Sorry, I'm like
yeah,
totally spaced out on it.
yeah. I think we were talking about how like you were like moving to EKS and stuff, right?
Oh yeah, gotcha. I mean it felt a little bit like cheating because like once we got onto EKS, everything just worked. We were using the SpiceDB operator. Shout out to the SpiceDB operator and the work that Evan has put on it. If you use the operator to run SpiceDB in Kubernetes, which is a super ergonomic way of doing so, you get all of the like dispatch features out of the box, like all of the SpiceDB nodes in the cluster just know how to talk to each other and will like do all of these dispatch behaviors automatically. So if you're running an EKS, we recommend using the operator. And we did that at my previous company and like didn't have any problems with the timeouts because our sort of like fronting service was in the same cluster as the SpiceDB nodes. And then everything just worked. It was great.
Nice. Okay. Yeah, I've dropped the link for the SpiceDB operator here in the chat as well. Have you seen folks sort of, shy away from using the SpiceDB operator and like go like a custom route and actually doing this?
You mean specifically with regards to operating within the Kubernetes environment, but kind of doing it by hand?
Yeah.
No, but
okay.
Not because I don't think it's happening, just because I haven't heard of it.
So okay. Yeah.
Other nice features while we're here, and I can wax poetic about it. Like one of the other nice things that the SpiceDB operator does is it will manage data store migrations for you through init containers, and it also maintains an update graph. So if there are versions of SpiceDB that would have like a difficult time talking to each other, for example, like a concrete example of this recently was that we wrote a new version of the lookup resources internals that is better optimized and works faster in more use cases. But in order for a dispatch from one node using that second version to land properly on another node that other node also has to speak that second version. So if you were to upgrade from like say 1.27, which didn't have that new implementation, and you were to upgrade to like the version that uses it by default, then you might see errors because as the pods are rolling, that first pod is going to send a dispatch out that's like, hey, use this like new version of lookup resources, and here's the context that you need. And then the old node would look at it and go, yeah, I don't know what you're talking about. And the dispatch would fail, and you would end up with an error on that request. The operator has an update graph inside of it that says, okay, we're gonna like make sure that we walk between checkpointed versions that like are known to be compatible with each other, and you won't have those issues. So yeah, it's cool stuff. Would recommend.
Okay, nice, interesting. Okay, and do you know how that works, like sort of under the hood?
It's a big old YAML file.
Okay.
So like a part of our
it's YAML all the way down, one of those.
Yeah, it always is. In like a part of our deploy process, we generate new versions of like, there's a YAML file that's like, these are all the versions, and there's a YAML file that's like actually describing a graph of like, okay, so for this version, these are the versions that you can get to, or vice versa. I can't remember which, but same idea. And then that's what the operator uses. It reads those YAML files to say, this is the path that I should take to get to where I want to go.
Okay, got it. Sweet. If folks want to check out the SpiceDB operator, again, it's all on GitHub. So check out github.com/authzed/SpiceDB-operator. Yeah, and folks, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. It doesn't have to be like a super involved question. Even if it's something about the basics, put it in chat. We'd be happy to sort of answer. Also, doesn't have to be strictly about ECS or EKS. It could be anything about AuthZed or SpiceDB, and we're here to sort of answer those questions. We're aiming to do this every fortnight at around this time. So if you have any questions about like installing SpiceDB, or if you're running into roadblocks, or if you didn't get the answer you wanted on our Discord, now's the time, and we'll try and figure it out with you, essentially. Yeah. Yeah, while we wait, if there are any questions, anything else that you've been working on, Tana, in the same space, or anything else that you want to speak about?
I guess the big thing for me recently has been working on composable schema syntax. So as it stands right now, so like one thing that I think of as like a feature rather than a limitation of SpiceDB is that when you write a schema, it has to happen all at once.
Yeah.
And so it's declarative in that regard. You know that when you write the schema, that is the thing that SpiceDB is running against. But the downside of that is that currently it all has to sit in a single file. And like even in my own experience at my last company, that file can get pretty big and pretty unwieldy pretty quickly. And so we want to provide better tools for users to develop against those schemas. So things like being able to import definitions across files. That's what I'm working on right this second. The thing that I'll move to after that is a better syntax for tests. So currently we have like, you can create like a validation.yaml file where you have like, there's a key that's just like the blob of the schema. Then there's a key that's all of the relations that would go into it. There's a key that's all of the assertions against those relations that you've written. And then there's a key that for like expected relations, which would essentially be like a full enumeration. Hey, Jesse. So as far as best practices for running SpiceDB on ECS, we mostly talked, like I told my story of the journey that my previous company took, and like the sort of TLDR was we ended up on EKS, and so we didn't get all the way to coming up with like a really nice, clever solution. But that the sort of two limitations for ECS are, one is that it uses an application load balancer by default, which what we've seen in practice is that it tends to drop connections for gRPC, even if you're running it in its like special dedicated gRPC mode. And then two is that in an ECS cluster, there isn't a good way for the SpiceDB nodes to be aware of each other, at least not out of the box, because they want to be aware of each other in order to do their like horizontal dispatch mechanism, which is a way that we keep cache hit rates high and like allow for good horizontal scaling. So from a load balancing perspective, one of the things that we're exploring is the use of a network load balancer rather than like an ALB or a classic load balancer. It operating on that lower level should mean that it doesn't get in the way of gRPC in the same way. And as far as the horizontal dispatch mechanism goes, we explored providing a like XDS-like discovery mechanism using something like CloudMap, and decided that that probably wasn't going to be sufficient for our use cases. And the thing that we're exploring right now is the use of app mesh, with the idea being that if all of your ECS instances are like registered with and hooked up to app mesh, then you should be able to do horizontal dispatch through app mesh. Also, if you're using app mesh, then you can probably use it for your ingress control as well in place of the load balancers. Although don't quote me on that, because I don't know that I would call myself like an expert on AWS and infrastructure generally. But those are the two things that we're exploring. And when we have, there's an examples repository that we have And my guess is that when we have a good working example of using AppMesh and ECS, we'll put it up in that examples repository, and then that can be something that you can inspect or adapt for yourself. As far as the data store, yes, Postgres and ODS is the same default. So some nice things there is that you like have all of the knobs right in front of you. You get to manage it yourself. The other one that I would, and like that was what we ran at my old company and generally had good luck with it. The other option, like the big thing that I would say is that if you have multi-region, or if you have multi-region, if you want to run in multiple regions at the same time and have them be like multi-primary, that would be a reason to choose something like Cockroach or Spanner.
But Spanner only works with Google Cloud Platform, if I'm not
Correct,
mistaken.
yeah. Although there was something that we were talking about at our most recent onsite about the latency between AWS and GCP data centers, and the funny thing is that like if you select the correct regions for each of GCP and AWS, you might actually have small enough latency for it to make sense. This is
okay.
That, like we tested in production, but is potentially
okay.
Yeah.
This has like a bunch of implications as to where the data center, how close the data centers are like physically located to each other, though, right?
Yeah, totally. Okay. You would need to be very aware of your network topology, which like, not everybody wants to deal with. So yeah, but sorry, what I was saying is if you need like multiple primary, or if you have like strong, like high availability requirements in terms of like explicitly needing like disaster recovery failover type stuff, that would also be a reason to use Cockroach, because part of the idea of Cockroach is that like you can just like lose an AZ or like lose a bunch of Cockroach nodes, and it's just going to keep chugging along the way that it did. But yeah, we used Postgres at my last job, and it worked just fine for our use case. And you can get a decent amount of scalability out of it just by getting yourself a bigger Postgres box. We also have some support for read replicas through logical replication, although that has consistency implications. So like put an asterisk on that. But we have customers, we have users who are running that way in production.
Cool. And people also use, I think, memdb for like local dev and integration testing. Do you see that as a common pattern? Because I know there is support for it.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So the memdb is just an in-memory data store. Definitely don't use that in production. But it's great for local dev. It's easy to just like start something up and throw it away. I guess let me also plug the integration, like the integration testing server, because that's something that I see people asking about a lot on Discord. Like if you find yourself running integration tests and wondering like, okay, how do I clean up my SpiceDB database after running an integration test? The answer is to, rather than using SpiceDB normally, use the serve-testing command. And what happens then is that it runs an in-memory database. And then for every new gRPC pre-shared key that you configure on a client and like start a connection to that server with, it gives you like a little sandboxed instance of SpiceDB in the process. So it has its own schema, it has its own data, it will give its own responses to the requests that you're sending, and they won't step on each other's toes. So you can run tests in parallel and everything's just going to work fine. And when you're done with a particular test, you just generate a new key and you keep going. So the only thing that you would really be worried about is, you know, if you have enough tests that are talking to SpiceDB, then like theoretically you could kill the node that serve testing is working on. But otherwise, you just stare it down at the end of the test and you're good to go.
Yeah, Jesse, thanks for that question and hope it answered, but feel free to ask follow-ups as well. Yeah, super awesome community contribution. Yeah. And yeah, just to, like, as Jesse says, awesome. And we have support for AWS IAM Auth as well, which we do, correct? I think this is probably through like, through the product. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't know that. I don't know the answer to that off of the top of my head.
Yeah, but I'm guessing through, like, I know, AuthZed dedicated, or there is support. I'm not sure, but we'll find that out. I can look up quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And thanks for those questions, Jesse. Tana, you were speaking earlier about wait, I lost my train of thought. You first spoke about the composable schemas, and then the integration tests, right? Yes, that's it.
Yeah, and I also had, like, I can talk a little bit more about the composable schema stuff too. So, like, one of the things that we're working on is, like, so yeah, I was talking about the validation file and how it's like a big old YAML document that includes the schema inside the YAML document. And that's like not a great developer experience. Like at my old company, what we did is we just like had the validations in one file and had our schema in another file, and then we wrote our own scripts to smush the two together for validation purposes. And
oh, okay.
Nice.
Now I
Jesse.
get it. Sorry, I completely,
Yeah.
I didn't have context. Sorry about that, Jesse. But yes, there was a pull request from a community member that added support for SpiceDB to auto-detect credentials, which was Jesse. Well, Jesse, thank you so much for that community contribution. I didn't put the two together for sure. So yeah, thanks for that. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, so the idea with like the testing improvements is to move the sort of like unit test framework for schemas into the schema syntax itself, with the idea being that either you can sort of write them in line, like how in some languages you just put the specs for a function right in the same file, and then your test harness goes through and like reads them out of those same files. Or you can put them in a JSON files, and then you import the portions of your schema that you need to run those tests. And then it'll include, like, it'll be a bespoke syntax for the tests, and then we'll do the work to provide like language server validation and editor syntax highlighting and all of that kind of stuff to just make it a nice experience. There's that, and then the last thing I'm excited about implementing is a notion of partials. We're still working on the naming of things, but the idea is that you could define, it would look like a definition, but rather than using the definition keyword, you would use a partial keyword. And then there's like relations and permissions within that partial. And then you can take those partials and you can sort of splat them into a definition. And then you have like reusable chunks, or the idea is that you can build, I talk about it as like vertical slices of your schema. So if you're familiar with our Google Cloud IAM blog post and like sort of the example schema that it talks about, you kind of have this core of you have users, and you have roles, and you have resources, and you have like a role binding that's kind of sitting in the middle and tying everything together. And the roles, the role binding, and the resources all have relatively independent definitions of relations and permissions. So like in a big company that's using this style of schema, you would have like multiple teams that are working on the same resource definitions, but like independent chunks of the relations and permissions. That was true at my last company. That was the schema that we used. And the idea is that you could pull those out into separate files and define them as partials, and then in the file that you're like compiling that will turn into your fully realized schema, you're just going like, okay, like I have this team's partial and this team's partial and this team's partial on this definition, and on this other definition I have this team's partial, this team's partial, this team's partial. And then all of those units can be tested separately, developed on separately, and then pulled together. So yeah, I'm excited about
Okay.
that. I've been getting good
Nice.
feedback on that.
Very cool. And how does the validation for something like this work when, like a bunch of different orgs, or not orgs, but a bunch of different teams do like, partials, and then it's
Mhm.
composed at like, say, a higher level from all of those partials. So does validation happen at like both in the partial and in, when it's combined as well?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The way it works in my head currently, I will get this written down at some point somewhere.
Okay.
But the idea is that rather than making the partial something that can be validated against, you would put together like your test file, and the test file would import the partials for the functionality that you care about. And then it would include like a skeleton of any other entities in the system that you need. So like the user definition would be a good example in this case, because like the user definition in our schema was empty. It was just the terminal subject. And so you would still need to have that in the file where you're writing your definition, your validations. You would need like a user definition, and then you would need all of the other definitions that sort of flesh out your schema. And then you would just put your partials in there. And then you have all of your validations for your little vertical slice of the schema in that validation file with its like special definitions. And yeah, that's kind of how that would work.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I'm at least very like excited to see this, and maybe we can, do a demo of this on like a future live stream once it's out.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah,
Do some live schema coding and kind of show how you would put together
awesome.
a schema system and put together some validations for it.
Yeah, very cool. All right. So if we don't have any questions, maybe we can, maybe we'll give our audience like a couple of minutes for any last questions. There is like a 10-second lag between us talking and the stream. So, we'll give them some time. Yeah, but thank you so much for all of this, Tana.
Yeah, absolutely.
This gave me a future idea to actually maybe try and do like a live deployment on ECS and see how it goes.
That'd be cool.
Yeah.
I don't actually like know off the top of my head how long it takes between like
Yeah.
pressing a button and like having something stood up. I'd be curious about that.
I mean, I was playing around with EKS recently. It does take like a good 5 to 10 minutes to at least get like something up and running. But
yeah.
Cool. Well, I don't see any more questions. So unless you have anything else that you want to talk about, Tana, maybe we can wind down for today's office hours. And yeah.
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
All right. Well, thanks again. And for folks watching, Jimmy, Jess, Jesse, Janessa as well, thanks for tuning in. We aim to do this every 2 weeks. So we will see you in 2 weeks' time. And yeah, just hit the subscribe button to be notified for future live streams and other videos as well. And until next time, see you soon. Thanks and happy Halloween.